Hello, everybody. I'm very pleased today to bring you a conversation with Dr. Lisa Wiedeman, who, quite unbelievably, is a 16-year carnivore and an absolute OG in the carnivore space. Dr. Lisa and I were together in Wyoming last year, and we had a fantastic time at the Beef Roundup. So I thought I'd invite you on this podcast, Lisa, and I really look forward to chatting with you. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I am so happy to be here. I am just so passionate to tell my story and help anybody who can relate to what I say. Mine was I'm going to say pretty much a lifelong struggle with not understanding, but definitely having a sugar, carb, processed food addiction. I just remember back, early, I think it started with my Easy Bake Oven that yeah, it's one of those things where I had no clue that what was happening through the years because addictions always worsen and a lot of people don't like to use that term addiction, and people say you cannot be addicted to food. That's crazy. But I'm like, oh yes, 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 you can. You can. There's a very specific addiction that can happen and often does. And, I just tried so hard for so long to figure out the behavior that I had and what I considered a disordered relationship with food. But at the time, again, not understanding or realizing or knowing the term of sugar addiction. And but I just knew I needed and wanted to stop being so drawn to secretive behaviors. If anybody can relate, they know right away when I say secretive behaviors. It's things like where you wait for people to leave the house before you have a little binge, or um, look forward to getting on your own by yourself. Um, and and it's very humiliating because, I really truly just didn't understand why. And I just thought there was just something so wrong with me. And I'm going to say I probably, let's say secretively, once the computer and internet came about, I started searching for answers, and I fell upon paleo, Atkins. I can throw out all the buzzwords. I read this book, Neanderthin. Somebody told me about the Schwarzbein principle, which was basically giving up flour and sugar. And all of those things were kind of setting off a little light bulb where I said, huh, okay, there's something to this. But I quickly realized, like on paleo, that, I was cleaning strawberries for my kids and every other one went in my mouth. And that wasn't normal behavior. And that I could binge on dried apricots, even though that's a fruit. It's natural, it's whole, one ingredient. And, I could go on and on where I could say that as much as I had hopes that this was it, it still was an issue. So it wasn't until I really fell upon a forum, because this was before Facebook and YouTube and Instagram. This was back in 2009, and I happened across a forum that was out in the interwebs, run by Charles Washington, and he had started this because a group had kind of gotten kicked off of a low carb forum that they were on, because they started a zero carb thread, and it got bigger and more popular. And they got booted off because that wasn't, I guess, wanted on that low carb forum. And in any case, once I hit upon that and started reading in there, there were people resolving themselves of all sorts of issues. diabetes, obesity, depression, bipolar. And oh boy, I saw two women in there writing in their journals that everybody could read about how this resolved their eating disorder. So, boy, did that get my attention. And I thought to myself, okay, well, this is weird. These people are just eating meat and drinking water. I'm not sure that that is, healthy or something that I pictured I could do, but I was game. I was willing and able to jump in and say, I was, let's just use the word desperate for an answer and a solution. And I was so relieved that there was people in there talking about my problem that, like I said, was really very secretive because it's downright embarrassing to feel like you binge and can't control yourself around food. So, yeah, I jumped in. I said, well, what does it hurt to try and start and let me continue to research this as I go along? And fortunately, the group was really very intent on learning and understanding. They were reading like Villamar Stephenson writings, The Fat of the Land and Not by Bread Alone, and the writings of Owsley the Bear Stanley, who had been very long-term carnivore. Um, and his writings and PDF are still available online for people to read. So yeah, that was really the start of my journey because what ended up happening is as I did this, and now at this point, let's say I'm 6 months into it, and I'm like, wow, this is the golden ticket. I got the Holy Grail here. Like, this is something powerful. And guess what, Simon? Nobody really wanted to listen. Nobody wanted to hear the story. People would ask because of course I was the one flying my freak flag, especially back then. There was no Michaela Petersons or Sean Bakers or anything going on, and I just knew that this was from the research I had done and the effect that it had on me and what I had seen in this small group that I was in. And then we had a meetup and we met at a restaurant in Philadelphia. I got in my car, I drove over an hour to meet these internet people, which back then was kind of risky and scary, and you didn't really do that back then. But I did because I felt so comfortable that I knew these people because we'd been reading in each other's journals, and it was magical just to be around people who really got it and who really had their own, well, I'll say why that made them cry. I had my why, and everybody, I'm just finding that's what's so fascinating about this. So many, so many people just come to this from so many different directions with their own personal strife and issue. And so yeah, that's really I'll tell you to get to the punchline of this all, because that was back in 2009. I then I kind of got a little quiet about it because yeah, I kind of learned nobody really wants to hear this wacky thing that I was doing and that I actually really believed it to be healthy. And so, the kind of pushback you get nowadays, even from people. So picture back then when it was even lesser known. And so I just went about kind of what I call living my zero carb way. And then, social media grew and came about. And then I was just on my Instagram and I saw the whole Sean Baker and Joe Rogan. And then there was people commenting saying, well, that's all well and good now, but it's not sustainable. And that's not healthy long term. And at this point, I was about, I guess about 10 or 11 years carnivore. And I was just like, oh, let me raise my hand here because I need to step in. And yeah, I just decided to make a separate account for myself on Instagram called Carnivore Doctor just to keep this whole things kind of separate, and it just kind of blew up because I started making comments like, yeah, if this is not sustainable, somebody better let me know about it. Fill me in how that is possible because I'm just, I've never been healthier or happier. And, back then I was, well, so I'm 60 now. So this was, about 5 years ago. And it's just been a beautiful transformation watching this sort of just grassroots effort of many of us medical professionals, I think in particular, needed to step up and step forward because at least we have a little bit more, I don't want to say, well, credibility in, I don't take my health lightly. I'm an optometric physician. I've been for over 34 years now. But of course, I I didn't learn anything about nutrition, and now my way of treating eye disease and patients is totally different. I have conversations with the diabetics that the bleeding that I see in your eye is completely reversible, as is your diabetes. And they're like, "Oh no, my doctor said I'll be diabetic for the rest of my life." And I said, "Au contraire." Let me enlighten you if you're willing to listen and learn. And interestingly enough, I found out that some people were so eager to hear what I had to say and took to heart what I had to say. And they'd come back for their 6 month follow up, like 30 pounds lighter and hugging me and like off of their medication. And then there was others who, same diagnosis, same discussion, and right away in the exam room, they hold up their hand. Oh, no, 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 doc, you don't understand. I'm Italian. I can't not eat pasta and bread and wine. That's not happening. And I said, "Okay, well, your body doesn't tolerate these carbohydrates, and I guess I'll check you in 6 months and we'll see if the bleeding has progressed." And Simon, it's just so interesting to under to learn the different I guess values that people put on their health and their ability to take their health into their own hands. And as frustrating as that can be, it's something, I had to accept, as well as in my own family. I had parents obese, diabetic, cancer, stroke, Parkinson's, hypertension. Let me see, am I missing anything? But I then realized and saw the addiction in them because nobody wanted to listen to me tell them, no, you don't understand. You can reverse this. You can heal. Nobody wanted to, I guess, either believe it or practice it or do it. I don't know. But that was a big frustration for me. And also my brother, 15 months older than me, obese. He happened to be a type 1 diabetic. My parents were type 2 diabetics. And, I say to people, your genetics are not your destiny. And I'm here to show that, I am, I didn't want to go down that road. And I saw that the problem that I had growing up and well into my adult years was eventually actually going to kill me if I didn't figure it out. So, yeah, I don't know if that was a pretty long-winded intro into where I come from, but I'll have to say now that it's such a beautiful life to be able to share my experience and help anybody who's wanting the information and wanting to understand the significance and the severity of sugar addiction. And I have so many people that keep relapsing. They know what they should eat, they know what they shouldn't eat. They love this carnivore way of life. They do great. And then something gets triggered. It's either stress, or it's just, an overwhelming trigger because food is all around and everything centers around food. It's where we go and what are we having? What are we eating? Right. And the family, the friends, the coworkers, there is just so much centered around food, and everybody is happily laughing and eating it and offering it. And it's the food that I cannot allow because I don't have sober behavior around these foods. And it's hard because people don't understand, and that's okay. I tell people you have to be okay with being different, and you have to embrace it, actually. It's really important because you'll never make it in this unless you surround yourself, which is difficult to surround yourself with other carnivores or keto or, I don't care what people um, decide that their food plan is. Just I say, as long as you are, eating nutrient dense food that you have sober behavior around. And of course, I am talking from my angle of it, of having had a severe addiction, that this is no joke and this isn't easy. It's really not.
No way. Wow, that was an incredible intro, and you do have an amazing story. I'm so grateful for you to share that. I think a lot of people can relate. Yeah, look, I agree. But perhaps you don't have that sort of carb sober behavior as you're sort of referring to it around people. I also think that your expectation and your standards are much higher than the average person. I think a lot of people will avoid bucking the trend or avoid really standing up for themselves and stepping back and taking control of their own health to their own detriment. Because, exactly what you've done is you've looked for an answer. You've identified, okay, this isn't working. I don't like the direction that my health is heading in. I actually need to do something about it. Whereas I don't know what I'd be curious to hear your perspective. I think a lot of people don't do that. I think they think, well, this is just the way it is. Your health deteriorates, you put on weight, and I have to eat what everybody else is eating because that's just what we eat.
Yeah, especially there's well, there's the cognitive dissonance that we've been brainwashed our whole lives, that you have to eat high fiber, lots of fruit and vegetable,
Low
lean
fat.
meat, low fat, right? And so that's part of it. And then, you know, I'm going to say the other part is people want a quick fix. They want a pill, they want the answer, and they're so used to, and I was brought up this way too. The doctor was revered, when there was something wrong, you go to the doctor and, oh, the doctor said this, right? And so I, you know, I don't know. I try to explain to people that yeah, I think what a lot of it is that you're exactly what you said. People have so normalized aging and getting old, and this is what happens when you get old. You end up on pills, you end up lots of doctor's visits, you end up with whatever, dementia, diabetes. I've had so many patients will sit in their chair and they're like, "Oh, don't get old. Everything falls apart once I turned, you know, whatever age they stick in there, 65, 70, 75, 60." And, I'm just here to say that we have to totally get out of that mindset. That is not the case. Neither age nor genetics are really dictating your demise. We as humans are here to evolve, and our bodies are constantly trying to heal, whether we have bacteria or a virus or a cut. Our programming is to stay on Earth for evolutionary purposes. So to think that we just deteriorate and shrivel up and die is just what we've been accustomed to, because I really think mainly in the past 100 years, our our food system has been so corrupted and so taken away from what is normal whole foods. Forget about just the carnivore thing. How about just whole foods, right? We've got so much processed foods. And on top of that, and we'll kind of get into this because this is really become a very important part of what I've been researching and learning is not only through the past 100 years have we been gradually normalizing eating all this processed food, the standard, I like to call it the standard atrocious diet, because the SAD, the SAD diet, normally we call it the standard American diet. We could call it the standard Australian diet for the letter A, but I substitute in A for atrocious because it is pretty much worldwide. You could say there's situations where that is happening. And the same time period is when technology exploded, and we've got so much non-native EMF, and we've got LED and fluorescent lighting, we've got computers, television screens. It's all very blue light concentrated and very unnatural to us. And so, as an eye doctor, I wasn't taught any of this. And I'm going to say something that's going to shock your audience unless they've been really in this space for quite a while, but it's still shocking to most everybody to hear from an eye doctor. I really don't want you to wear your sunglasses. It's really not healthy for your eyes or your brain or your body to have sunglasses on all the time when you go outside. And people are like, "What? You are nuts." No, my doctor said I'll get cataracts. I've got early cataracts. I got to keep my sunglasses on. I've got macular degeneration. I've got X, Y, and Z. No, I need to wear my sunglasses. And I said, you really need to dig deep. You need to learn and understand that that's one of the worst things that you can actually do. So, as I dug deeper, because again, being an eye doctor, I decided that I needed to really understand this whole light environment. And just like we have real whole food and junk food, we have real light and junk light. So the real light that belongs in our eyes and on our skin is sunlight, moonlight, I guess you could say starlight, firelight, and candlelight. And other than that, the only next close thing that is man-made would be an incandescent bulb, which has much more of a full spectrum, which includes the red, infrared, and um, and really blocking out everything else. And there's that acronym ALAN, ALAN, artificial lights at night. So in particular, once the sun has set, we don't want any lights in our eyes. We don't want any of definitely no artificial lights. If you're outside and there's moonlight, that would be okay, but um, it really then turned into understanding there's receptors on our eye that are, well, let's start off by saying our eyes are not just for vision. And that was a big epiphany. Like, wait a minute. Eyeballs, vision, see, we've got eyes to see. Well, the eye is directly connected to our brain, and there are receptors on our eye and in our eye that have nothing to do with vision and have everything to do with the suprachiasmatic nucleus and circadian rhythm and mitochondria and POMC. I could throw out all sorts of terms that'll just make people's heads spin, but ultimately what I've come to realize is the importance of red, infrared, near infrared, far infrared, the importance of that spectrum for the health of our bodies and our eyes that we are fairly devoid of because of how much time we spend indoors. It's estimated about 93% of our days are spent indoors. And, you can see that. It's like we wake up in the house box, we get in the car box and drive to the office box, get back in the car box, go to the store box, and back to the home box. And at what point are we really spending time out in nature? Either forget about grounding and being in your bare feet. How about just exposing your eyes to the sunlight? And So, yeah, I started really digging deep into the works of Dr. Jack Kruse and all of the awesome circadian rhythm researchers and scientists that are out there that I know you're familiar with. And I just decided I needed to shift my sleep pattern, go to bed earlier, wake up with the sunrise, make sure I expose my eyes every morning within the first hour or two of sunrise to get that initial light. And I try to, spend time in the middle of the day and I try to grab some sunset light. And when I am indoors, I don't put lights on in my house at all. I have some motion detector amber lights throughout, so once it gets dark enough, it senses my motion and it will glow red or amber so I can see. But I've just kind of shifted my lifestyle to be where I just have as little exposure to artificial light as possible. Um, and, you know, you could go a little crazy with that because um, the, there's lights everywhere. And now, like, say I go to the gym, if let's say it's the middle of the day and I'm going to just go work out at my gym, I wear amber glasses because the entire place is just lit up, like how bright and even in stores. So it's almost like once you know, and then it's almost like you can't escape it. And then I start feeling a little off when I'm wearing these amber glasses everywhere and nobody else is. And I keep looking around for somebody who's in my tribe. And it was funny. I was on a cruise this past winter and um, I did wear my amber glasses a lot because on the ship, forget about walking through the casino. That's like, an explosion of blue light toxicity, but just everywhere is lit up, right? And the last day of the cruise on the elevator with people exiting, I saw somebody with amber glasses on and I had to talk to him. I'm like, and so, I feel like the message is starting to get out, and I don't know. What is your take on that, Simon? As far as do you see that there's an awakening of people to this whole light toxicity?
Hmm. A good question, because certainly in the circles that you and I are in, yes, people are very aware of it. Broadly speaking, I'm not too sure. I think I know that there's been some rumblings around in the Maha movement of bringing back incandescent lights and raising awareness of the harm of really terrible artificial lighting and all this artificial lighting. It flickers and it's full of blue light, and which is completely unnatural. So I think there is the rumblings of it, but I don't think it's very mainstream at all. I do think, fortunately, blocking blue light at nighttime is very pleasant. So I think we definitely have that on our side in that if you invite somebody over and you've got the amber sensor lights, which I have as well, in your place, and you've got candles or you've got fire, and it creates a really wonderful atmosphere. I think I think that's a really easy sell. I go to dinner at my parents' place and I walk in and I turn off the lights, and I'm like, can we just have the lamps on? This is ridiculous. We do not need it to be so bright in here. It's like I'm in a supermarket or a dental office at 8 p.m. when it's dark outside. So there's that. And then I suppose, Huberman is massive, particularly for, say, my demographic, like men, 25 to 35. And he has been big for a long time on light in the eyeballs and on the skin first thing in the morning. So I know that we're coming at it from a few different angles. The the Jack Cruz stuff and like what I would call the more sort of hardcore light and circadian health topic. I mean, he's got a very committed, diehard group of fans. But I don't think I wouldn't say that his message is really going mainstream. I mean, people like my friend Dr. Max Goulhane is doing a great job of translating what Dr. Cruz is saying and putting it in friendlier language that's easier to understand and that can connect with people. So yeah, look, maybe we're starting to take a shift. There's certainly the health conscious people um, are getting into it. I mean, like I don't wear the amber glasses or the red glasses myself, but I do block blue light naturally in my home, and I do get as much sunlight as I can. So I suppose to different degrees, you get different people sort of getting involved.
Right. And I think part of the difficulty is no different than with the food thing is, you eat something, um, you know, processed, let's just say whatever it is, cookies, ice cream, pizza. There's no instant penalty the next day, the next week, the next month, but decades of our habitual diet is what has gradually caused disease, right? Same thing with the light. It's like there's no like zap that's happening at the time where this high flicker rate fluorescent and LEDs are coming at us, but over time it'll take its toll. And um, so I'm just really trying to um, understand at a deeper level the the effect on particularly macular degeneration because in about 1911 the occurrence of macular degeneration was one in hundreds of thousands. So one in hundreds of thousands would be afflicted with it. And now, over the age of 55, it's one in 11. And over the age of 75, it's one in three. So that's astounding. And you need, it's one of those things where I know Dr. Chris Kenobi, he's an ophthalmologist that has studied this in depth and written books. He is under a very definitive uh, thought that it's the seed oils that he has shown with the escalation of the macular degeneration is also the escalation of those fats into our diet, the oils. And I really believe, after a lot of what I've been studying and looking at, that equally important is the light. So, I used to think, oh, you are what you eat. Everything, we're healing things with this way of eating, and, there's so much positive about it. But I do believe that there are certain things that are, it's at least 50% the light environment to the food as far as importance. And I think it's important to get people to understand that we are, just kind of think ancestrally what we were intended to eat and what we were intended to do. And it certainly wasn't to sit in front of a television screen or a computer screen all day, every day, right? And those lights are not natural. And I it's probably more so to understand the information that is out there about how critically important sleep is and circadian rhythm is, and that we really need to pay attention to this. I know, I honestly, I think like 3, 4 years ago when I first saw somebody on social media who was changing their light bulbs in their house to red bulbs, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, like that would go over like a ton of bricks in most households where one spouse is doing this and the other spouse is like, what the hell are you doing? Turn the damn lights on, right? And it was funny you mentioned at your parents' house because I was just at my mom's last week. She lives like 3 hours away. I visit every so often, and when I am there now, it's like the all the lights are on, and I can't go shut them off fast enough. And I actually even had a candlelight dinner with my mom. I made us dinner. And I said, Ma, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to shut these lights off and it's just going to be me and you and the candles. Um, and it just, I know it seems okay. Somebody listening to this could say, all right, now you're off your rocker. Now you're taking this too far. That's crazy. We should be able to just turn the lights on. But yeah, if you can get incandescent bulbs, I would agree. You can turn the lights on. But other than that, if you really want to preserve your health, I think it's really important. And I like to really emphasize that because um, I think we take um, things are just so normalized that are so very wrong, and we need to wake up.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. I just want to ask you about the food addiction, which you spoke in detail about at the start. What is it about the carnivore diet that you think is so effective at treating or helping people overcome food addiction?
Yeah, that's such a great, great question because there's such a true, wonderful answer to this. Um, so if we look at any other addiction, alcoholism, heroin, cocaine, right? When you recover from that, you abstain and you get abstinent and you don't touch it ever again. And you remain in recovery and you are abstinent from your drug, right? And then, of course, you could look at it and say, well, I can't be abstinent from food. Everybody's got to eat. This is crazy. Well, guess what? It's not a fatty ribeye that I'm hoarding and binging on and throwing out the wrapper so nobody sees what I ate, right? I don't binge on hard-boiled eggs. I don't binge on salmon or shrimp, right? The things that are addictive when they combine the fat, the sugar, and the salt, and the addiction experts that are on staff at pretty much every major food manufacturer who's they're there intentionally to make this food addictive. Think, Doritos and, you name it. But even something as simple and supposedly nutritious like a Quest protein bar for the bodybuilders, well, heck, that's got sweetener in it, right? And there is, salt and sweet and texture and that you could eat five of those. You could say, I'm not done after one if you have a problem with, sugar. So the big kind of light bulb moment with when I ran into this crazy group of people who were eating meat and drinking water, and I'm like, well, of course I won't binge anymore if that's what my diet is, but is it healthy? And the answer is yeah, not only is it healthy, but it's actually optimal and it's ancestrally natural. And, I kind of got excited with the fact that, okay, I'm not going to kill myself here to relieve my problem, but it is really abstinence that is necessary and it's so possible. And I even say people say, well, but I like my veggies. I like my whatever. I was like, well, you usually like your cheese or your sauce on the veggies. To eat just a raw piece of broccoli, I'm not so sure you would turn to that or kale over having a ribeye. Um, and you put balsamic on something, well, there's sugar in that, right? And yeah, so um, yeah, I have heard some say that, and I quickly wrote and corrected, but it was on a Facebook forum kind of group thing that they were talking about that they would discourage um, people with eating disorders from doing the carnivore diet because it's restrictive and it's very restrictive, and that that could cause problems for somebody, who has a disordered relationship with food. And I just said, that's just the farthest from the truth. It was so freeing to limit myself to foods that I actually have sober behavior around. I
Yeah.
don't binge on ground beef or lamb chops. I just don't. And to feel that freedom of I can nourish my body in an amazingly healthy way and be relieved of my addiction because it is abstinence. And I don't think anybody, I'll tell you story after story of people who had turned to keto and got very hung up on the keto cookbooks and the keto desserts and the keto treats and the keto bars and the keto ice cream and you name it. And all they were doing is grasping at the foods that were mimicking the foods that they were binging on. And it was not helping the situation because, you make a pan of keto brownies and you eat the whole damn pan. Well, where are you at that point? You're still, having disordered behavior, and you're still then typically hiding the fact that you just ate an entire pan of, well, it was keto, right? So, yeah, it's just I coach people one-on-one and I have a membership group because I explain it's so important to be in a group environment to get the support and the accountability because this is really tough for anybody who's, been in this spot where you lose control around your ability to stop overeating or stop compulsively eating, whatever you want to call it. It's just such a beautiful thing. And I'm even right now going through an explanation, and I've done a couple YouTube videos on it about the lion diet. And somebody wrote to me and said, come on, you're a carnivore for 16 years. Why would you possibly need to do the lion diet, or why are you promoting it? And I said, it's a whole different level of quieting the food noise for anybody who's had issues with food. And I explained that there's many who are in this space who will say, well, pork rinds, they're carnivore, right? They open up a bag of pork rinds, and guess what? They don't stop until the bag is empty. Again, crunchy, salty, mimicking behavior of what we did with chips and pretzels and crackers and so yeah, the whole carnivore thing being too restrictive and not good for people with eating disorders makes my skin crawl because it saved my life. I mean, it literally, I'm going to say, literally saved my life. I was just, addictions always worsen over time, and I was spiraling downward. And I just knew eventually some aspect of it was going to get me. And that's part of the reason why I really am so passionate about talking about this whole carnivore way of life. And it's really just to help anybody and everybody who just, is coming to it for trying to understand how to implement it, or, what different things do I do, those kind of things. It's great. But in particular, people who have really struggled trying to maintain carnivore. And, it's not as easy as flipping a switch as it is for some people. Like, you know, there's a guy, Kerry Mann, he had severe depression, was on a bucket load of medications, right? And obese and all this stuff. And he understood and found and learned about it, flipped the switch, started it just in a remarkable way, healed and is just turned his entire life around and his family's life around, right? But there's so many people that understand that switch needs to be flipped to reach health and to get off their meds. And they flip the switch and they go along until they don't. And it's a very quick, slippery slope once I'm just going to have a bite of the wedding cake. Well, I screwed up that day. I might as well have a cheat weekend. And then it many times, and this is no joke, ends up into a cheat year. And they're trying to claw their way out and reach out to me and say, I'm beside myself. I don't know what to do. I was pretty steady and good for about a year, and now I just can't, I can't get it back. And people who perpetually over and over and over start and then, you can't even call it a relapse. You have to be out of your addictive substance for at least 6 months before, if you slip, it's called a relapse. Anything that you're using during that first 6 months, you are still just actively in your drug. And yes, sugar is a drug. So whatever, whether it's smoking or alcohol or harder drugs, if you are continuing to slip, you're still actively using and you're still active in the addiction. And it's really tough. But yeah, I can't say enough about how many people who I've worked with over the past 15 years that have just, it just makes my heart sing when I know that, they write me and say, this is my 7 year carniversary and I owe it all to you. This is, just been miraculous. And I know it works, but there's a lot of tools that need to be put into your tool belt to be able to handle the onslaught of what I call naysayers, the family, the friends, the coworkers who come at you with, well, that's all great until you have a heart attack. What are you going to do then? And what's your cholesterol? And blah, 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 right? Anything to, and honestly, a lot of them are just purely innocently ignorant, right? They just don't know. They're not just trying to sabotage you, they just don't know. And yeah, you have to just kind of get used to you don't owe anybody an excuse or an explanation. You just have to have enough ammunition. I always say, get your shield out, put your shield up, and get your sword out because it's a battle with the whole food addiction thing. It really is.
Hmm. Fantastic answer. Yeah, look, for people who call carnivore an eating disorder, how can a diet that is exactly what we need as humans, that is perfect human nutrition, be an eating disorder? Because the definition of disorder is that you're damaging yourself or you're denying yourself of essential nutrients. Whereas on a carnivore diet, you're giving yourself exactly what you need. Um, if anything, it's just a perfect optimal diet. And I also like what you were saying about the um, ketogenic diet, which often allows in all sorts of stuff which is not healthy. And these keto cookies and bars and all sorts of stuff just lead to binge eating. And the Lion diet is, in my opinion, the absolute gold standard of human nutrition. You're just eating fatty ruminant meat. That is the most pure food for humans. And you really are not going to overdo it. You can binge and binge and binge on fatty red meat. Eventually, your body will say, I've just had enough. And you'll get the exact perfect nutrition that you need. Carnivore is fantastic, but the Lion diet is really the king of the diets. And as we see online, people are doing the carnivore diet, but they're having a lot of dairy. They're making all sorts of meals out of pork rinds ground up into pizza bases and all sorts of stuff. And yes, that might be okay for some people who don't have food addictions and can happily eat a carnivore pizza once a week. Fantastic, enjoy yourself. But for those people who these sorts of foods will be a trigger, it's not helpful. Um, the other comment I wanted to say was you guys all heard Dr. Lisa talking about the light health things and Jack Cruz and how that's such a big piece of the puzzle. You sort of have to have the context of Lisa, you were right about carnivore 16 years ago, and you're very much at the tip of the spear, so to speak. you are certainly ahead of the curve. The light health stuff, and that being possibly 50% of the health puzzle. I agree that there is more to it than just the carnivore diet. I think the carnivore diet is an incredible place to start and to do things like get on top of harmful food addictions. But there are other aspects of our health, including the light, which make a massive, massive difference. And I completely agree that most people, not everybody, a lot of people live inside a box, and the box is their apartment, their car, their office, and they're not really out in nature. And when they are, they've got sunglasses on and sunscreen. And so they're just so disconnected from all these natural signals that we would normally get. And they become kind of hypersensitive to it, and they can't engage with the weather and the sun and what's really happening in reality. So I definitely think you're spot on there. And then also things, like stress and other parts of our life and human connection and all that sort of thing are all very important and valid pieces of the health puzzle. You can have the most perfect carnivore or lion diet, but if you're not happy and you're not out in the sun and you don't have that connection and friendship and all that sort of stuff, what's the point? Your health can really struggle.
Yeah, and the other aspect of that you just brought up with sunscreen, we're really conditioned to fear the sun. And we are so, well, they have attempted to convince us that the sun causes melanoma and the sun causes cancer. And it's really the opposite. It But it's a combination of things because you can't have the sunglasses on because it needs to signal to your brain that the level of the sunlight that's out there so it can prepare your skin. And and I tell people the sunscreens are so toxic and that our skin needs the sun to make the vitamin D and the nitric oxide. I mean, it goes on and on. And we have just been brainwashed incorrectly to fear the sun. And I think a lot of it has to do with, and I've actually looked into this, and there's two companies, and I don't know whether it was L'Oreal and Nestle that were out to make a lot of money because of the sunscreen aspect in makeup, or I can't exactly remember the backstory to it, but they did a huge campaign about the sun, and all the studies are done with just isolated UVB and not full spectrum. So the cancer statistics are not really what they are. And yeah, that's another one of the messages I try to get out because I've been a sun lover my whole life. Fortunately, I'm thinking, well, gosh, I did something good that was actually supposedly bad for me back then that was actually good. Um, and um, yeah, and people say, well, aren't you worried about wrinkles? Aren't you worried about cataracts? Aren't you worried about cancer? And my mom had blah, blah, blah. And just people go on and on about different things. And it's kind of just really important to have an open mind, step back from all of your cognitive dissonance that's happening and dig deep and really try to understand and find the truth.
100%. I think that's a good piece of advice to finish on. So, Dr. Lisa Wiedeman, thank you so much for your time. That was fantastic. I know people are going to get a lot out of this conversation, and I'm really grateful for you appearing on the podcast and for joining me today.
My pleasure, Simon. I'm just so like you can tell I am so passionate to
Yeah.
talk about this because it's life-changing. And if we can just, if your podcast ends up reaching just the right person at the right time who maybe really connects with my message and can really start digging in. And I know it's so hard to wrap your brain around this whole crazy thing. Eat meat, drink water and live life. But yeah, it's what's natural and normal. And yeah, I'm just so happy to be a representative of a long-term carnivore who's still alive and kicking and doesn't have scurvy.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you so much.